three reasons why we think Asia should outperform US and Europe. And by the way, in terms of the numbers, we expect that the outperformance in growth will be about 450 basis points versus US by the fourth quarter of this year. And the three reasons why we think that this will come through is that Asia is having domestic demand strength in a much stronger manner across the region, but particularly in countries like China, India, Japan, and Indonesia. And that's helping us to ensure that growth outperformance builds in. In terms of the specific reasons, number one is Asia has not had interest rate shock that US and Europe has had. And that's because inflation problem has been far more manageable. And we're expecting about 80% of the region to have inflation within central bank's comfort zone by the third quarter of this year. And number two is China's reopening and broad-based policy support driving domestic demand there. And number three is, there are idiosyncratic reasons in countries like Japan, India, and Indonesia driving their domestic demand. So that's what is building up to a strong case for the region as a whole. But I agree that Korea, Taiwan, which are more external demand oriented, will be somewhat softer compared to the other top four economies that I mentioned.
Break down your analysis a bit more on what you think of China's consumers. Our previous guest was saying that that this consumer resurgence is not materializing, and the next 9 months could be fairly rocky.
Well, I think the data that came out in the month of April has created some concerns in investors' mind, but that's really more reflected in the production side. So when you look at the downside surprise we got for the data for the month of April, it was more in industrial production relative to retail sales. We think retail sales is still going to continue to improve going forward, despite that small hiccup that you saw in retail sales in the month of April. And that's because, you are seeing that build out of employment growth and recovery there. That we think will drive that income growth for the households and therefore consumption growth. Look, I think the approach that we are taking is somewhat different for China. I think everybody is looking at the US and saying as you reopen, there should be a big gust of spending. But Asia has not done fiscal transfers. So this is more like an organic recovery. And therefore, it's more gradual compared to what you would have seen in the US.